Welcome, everyone. My name is Christopher Baity, the Executive Director of Semper K9 Assistance Dogs, a nonprofit I founded with my wife back in 2014. Over the last 3 years, I've been planning this project, and the team has been working really hard for the last couple of months to get this first episode of the Top Dog Unleashed podcast edited and uploaded. I want to start this episode off strong with our guests, Andrew Guidotti and Brandon Liebert. I've known Brandon Liebert for more than 20 years, and Andrew is like a little brother to me and has worked for Semper K9 for the last 3 years. This first episode is a little long, so please bear with us, but I promise future episodes are going to highlight MWD handlers, Marines, and their experiences going back to 2000. Please enjoy this first episode brought to you by the Top Dog Consultant.
I've really been teaming up to start this podcast for several years now, but it really came down to bringing in my co-hosts today, Brandon Liebert and Andrew Guidotti. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm really looking forward to today's episode. What are y'all thinking? Y'all want to jump right into it, or do we think, well, we need to get in some introductions here? We're gonna run with it and treat this like a live episode. But welcome to both of y'all. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, the floor is yours, gentlemen.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go ahead and go first. So Brandon Liebert, I was born and raised in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then when I pretty much got done with high school, I decided to go ahead and join the United States Marine Corps as a military police officer, and that was back in 2002. Went over to boot camp, and once I got done with boot camp, there in good old Hollywood Marine.
Oh,
And
we won't make fun
so,
of you too much, Brandon.
yeah, don't give me too much hard time. And then went to my military infantry training school there over at Camp Pendleton. And then from there went over to Fort Lost in the Woods, as we like to call it. And while we were out there in Fort Lost in the Woods doing my MP training, so same as Chris. And then while I was going through my MP training, K9 slot came up, so I decided, hey, let's go ahead and do it. So went ahead and went on the board for that, and I won a spot for K9. So then once I got done in November of 2002 with my MP training, then went straight over to Lackland Air Force Base, where I went to the Military Working Dog School, and then graduated from that school and went to my first duty station in, let's see here, March of 2003. And so my first duty station was at MCAS Cherry Point, which is located in Cherry Point or Havelock, North Carolina. And excuse me. And so from there, did my duties and deployed in 2004 to Iraq. And as a matter of fact, that's where I met yours truly, Mr. Chris Baity. And so we deployed together to Iraq in 2004, and we ended up meeting up on the same base at one point as I was doing a transition from one base to another, and then came back to my base in November of 2004. Then from there, I decided to re-enlist into the Marine Corps and go to Lackland Air Force Base as a trainer for the military working dog program. So that's where we train all the dogs to be able to go to the different bases and deploy. And I did that from 2006 until 2010. And that's when I decided to get out because I was like, well, let's see here. If I stay in the military, it's going to take me further away from K9. And I really loved this job. So because I really loved this job, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and get out and I'm going to do it as a civilian. And so that's what I did. So I did civilian contracting, and that's when I met up with yours truly again, Mr. Chris Baity. And we actually got signed up for the same job with Ronco, and we deployed together to Afghanistan in 2010 together, and we were on a little teeny tiny fob called Frontenac. I call it the trucker stop. And so from there, we spent a year together on that deployment as well. And then once I came back to the States, I decided to do another contract, and that's where I did the Baghdad Embassy. While I was going through my background check for the Department of State, they decided to put me on this other contract. And this contract was actually the withdrawal of everything from Iraq. So I actually got to be there for OIF 1 for the beginning, and I was there for the drawdown. So once as a military, and then the other as a civilian. So I got to see both sides of the coin there for that. So it was pretty cool to be able to do that. And then once that contract ended, it just so happens that my Department of State um, security clearance went through, and then I was over at the Baghdad embassy for another company. And then I did some more contracting. I decided to try to come back to the United States, and while I was in the United States, just try to find a job that I can kind of stay there. And so I applied for Department of Homeland Security, and so I was K9 for Orlando's airport and the surrounding areas. So we searched all the different airports that were in the area and transportation places, so like Greyhound and the train stations, all that kind of stuff for the Department of Homeland Security. And then I left that job and became a canine handler. Well, I'm sorry, not a canine handler, a canine trainer for the Navy SEALs and their program. So from 2014 to 2019, I was doing that contract, training the Navy SEALs and their guys and their dogs. And so I did it on both coasts. So my first year was on the East Coast, and then the rest of my time was spent in San Diego on the West Coast. And while I was out there in San Diego in 2016, I decided to start my own dog training company, Inception Canine Academy, which I still do to this day. And that's pretty much basically it. Been doing that. I did actually moved the business from San Diego, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and that's where I currently reside right now.
Thank you, Brandon, for that introduction. And not to steal Andrew's thunder, but one thing I want to highlight is Brandon started his first duty station at the same duty station that our next Marine and our other co-host for today. What's interesting about his story, not to steal his thunder, is that he's an OJT Marine, which myself and Brandon are what you would consider pipeline, which is what a majority of military working dog handlers. They join or for the Marine Corps. They join the Marine Corps. They go to MP school. They get selected in MP school to go to Lackland as a military working dog handler. Andrew's a little different. I mean, Andrew's graduated from military police school and showed up to his first duty station, and then while he was there, he decided he really wanted to push more towards being a dog handler, and became a dog handler. So, without further introduction, I'm sorry I stole your thunder, Andrew, but to our other co-host, Andrew Guidotti.
Yeah, I'm Andrew Guidotti. I grew up in Lake Orion, Michigan. It's about an hour northwest of Detroit, Michigan. So I grew up with a love of hockey, played it my entire life. After I graduated high school and I realized I was not going to be a pro hockey player in the NHL, and I had no interest in going to college, I decided I would enlist in the Marine Corps. And I saw something on TV or in the news about military working dogs, and I decided that's what I wanted to do. So I told the recruiter that's what I want to do, and he told me it'd be very hard. You can't just sign a contract for it. And I told him I will do it. So I signed a contract as a 5811 military police officer, and I went to boot camp in September of 2017. I then graduated boot camp in December of 2017 and went to Marine combat training later in that December, graduated in January, late February, and went to military police school in Fort Lawson Woods, like Brandon mentioned earlier. It was a great time, had a blast, and graduated in May, and got orders to my duty station of Cherry Point, North Carolina as well. Once I got there, I actually was a military police officer for a few months, and once I kind of got my ears wet and I started actually doing my job, I had asked my staff sergeant how I could get back to the kennels, and I was told he would have to give me the okay, and the kennel master would, and I would have to do on-the-job training in my off time when I was not working, and if a seat ever opened up, I would have to compete with the other Marines that also want to be dog handlers to get selected. So I chose to do that, and it was a lot of extra work on some off time, so if you were working night shift, you would be at the kennels the next morning. And it was completely worth it. In the end, I think we had 5 or 6 Marines that came around the kennels, and me and another handler both got selected to go down to handler's course in November of 2018. I then graduated in February of 2019 from handler's course and went back to Cherry Point, North Carolina, where I stayed for the rest of my career. And unlike Chris and Brandon, the times changed a little bit in the late 2010s, and there wasn't as many combat deployments. But what we did have was Secret Service and United Nations missions to support in an explosive capacity. So I did 11 Secret Service missions with 2 different dogs. Diaz, who's named after a fallen handler of ours, Staff Sergeant Christopher Diaz, who died in September 28, 2011 in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, supporting combat operations, and MWD Drax. And since then, I had gotten out of the Marine Corps, and I kind of found myself lost in Virginia. We moved up here for my wife's work, and I wasn't doing much of anything. And another handler, friend of ours who deployed with Chris and Brandon at different times, they knew each other, adopted Diaz when he retired from the kennels because I could not. And then we had a military working dog handler reunion specifically for Marines up in Washington, D.C. about 3 years ago, and Al strung me along. And through that, I ended up meeting Chris. So now I no longer am a hermit staying in my house not working, and I'm currently a service dog and veteran team trainer for Semper K9 Assistance Dogs.
Oh, that is awesome, and I'm glad you jumped right into that introduction. I think one thing I'd like the audience to know is all 3 of us have been attending the Military Working Dog Handlers Reunion. This previous year, we did it down in San Antonio, Texas, which is the second time we've done it in the last 5 years. And, you know, one thing I love about that story, which I know we'll at some point in that time probably get to talk about in future episodes, but literally clandestine. You know, one thing that's going to be interesting for Brandon and my conversation is just the fact that we ran into each other, that we did that deployment in 2004 supporting Operation Enduring Freedom. Technically, I guess it was the second wave, OIF2. Did I mess it up? Yeah. Operation
Yeah,
Iraq.
we got there at the end of OIF1, so we were part of OIF1, and then we did most of OIF2.
Yeah, and that's what and one thing that's going to be fun when we talk about stories is how all our stories kind of converge, and I love using that word clandestine because there's no way, other than the fact that we're both dog trainers, dog handlers, that Brandon and I should have ran into each other, so easily on that government contract, especially as many contracts running around. And to jump back into Andrew. Literally, Andrew sat. I literally just sat down right next to Andrew because it was the only seat available at the reunion to have our last little dinner, I believe is what it was, Andrew. And
Yeah.
just happened to sit next to you and didn't know anybody around me. And just more than 10 or 20 seconds later, Andrew's telling me, because we were in D.C. and weren't we? Yeah,
Yes.
we were in D.C. Yeah. But, not more than 10 or 15 seconds into the conversation, and Andrew's like, I live in Virginia. Where? I think you said you lived in Culpeper or Warrenton. And I was like, dude, how do I not know you? Why do you not know me? Why? I think literally I said, why don't you work for me? Right?
You did. So, yeah. And I said, I don't know you.
Yeah. And that's not to be humble too, talking to my audience out there. Andrew's been working with me for about 3 years at Semper K9 Assistance Dogs. Like I said, we train service dogs for disabled veterans, but it's much more than just a service dog organization. It is a family. We have 130 something veterans that have gone through our program. I love marketing and promoting that Semper K9 Assistance Dog has assisted at least 500 families since our inception in 2014. I'm getting long-winded here, but in the end, I'm looking forward to all future upcoming episodes, talking more in depth with Andrew, talking more in depth with Brandon. I know he's got stories for days, and there's a lot of things that we'll jump into. But let me slow down a little bit. And one thing that I'm excited about for our inaugural episode today is talking about, like Brandon has said, and talking about how this podcast came about. Brandon and I met in 2004 for the first time in Iraq. We had both deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. I want to tell my story real quick, and I want to see what Brandon has in comparison. But And I've told this story before, but let me get it out of the way here. I literally showed up to work in, I think it was probably October, November of 2003. I had just finished supervisor's course. I had gone through special reaction team, which is like military SWAT for the military, like entry type stuff. And I had even was not to be off tangent here, but I literally was telling veterans the other day that I love that my career. Not that I had a perfect career, but my literally everything that I'm dealing with now, whether it be at my job at Semper K9 or preparing me for this podcast and for this new production venture, is I literally fell along the path. I didn't, as much as I love bragging that I joined the Marine Corps to be a dog handler. Just like Andrew said, I came into this just hoping, just chasing something. Didn't know where I wanted to do. Knew I did not want to go to college. I had done 4 years of Marine Corps ROTC, and I knew the Marine Corps was like one of the coolest things possible. When I was in high school, we got to go up to DC and visit Marine Corps Base Quantico. I volunteered. I was the cadet captain. I was the commanding officer for our Marine Corps program, or our ROTC program, the cadet program. And I got to volunteer to put on this bite suit, as we call them in the industry. And I got housed by a military working dog, probably not more than a 70 or 75-pound Belgian Malinois. Put me on my face. And I had already dipped into the Marine Corps about a month after I turned 17 years old, which is about as early as you can join. And I knew I wanted to be a Marine, but I didn't know there were really jobs. I believe I was open contract, not even knowing that I could choose an MOS. But I got to put on that suit at Quantico, got to catch a dog. I was a fresh 17-year-old that, was excited about the future. But this dog put me on my face, and I was more than willing to go back to my drill instructor, or go back to my recruiter and say, hey, I want to be a dog handler. And, he broke the bad news to me pretty quickly that you can't just join the Marine Corps to be a dog handler. You can become a military police officer. If you're a top of your class and you have to volunteer for it, you have to get selected. You have to go in front, and you have to compete with other Marines there and other military police officers to get those select number of spots to be a military working dog handler. And luckily myself and Huntley, who's in my class, got to do this. At some point, we'll get to talk about other Marines. I can literally name 2 or 3 classes before me and 2 or 3 classes after me. And in fact, when I graduated military handlers course and MWD handlers course and went to Okinawa, almost every handler that had gotten there over the previous couple months before me and the previous couple months after me, all had just graduated. I knew we were really good friends with them. So I'm really hoping we can jump some of them into future episodes. But let me do this. Let's go ahead and jump right into 2004, 2003, going into 2004. When I was in Okinawa, Japan, my first duty station was when September 11th happened. I was in boot camp when the USS Cole was bombed. My drill instructor sat us all down and said, the world will be at war with an Arabic nation in less than 12 months. Mm-hmm. And September 11th happened 10 and a half months later. So, gentlemen, do you mind telling me where were you on September 11th? I think both. I know Andrew was probably.
I was probably watching Sesame Street.
Yeah, Andrew was super young. But Brandon, where were you on September 11th?
So on September 11th, I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was dating this girl, and we were asleep. And so all of a sudden, my phone rings, and I answer it, and it's a buddy of mine. And so this buddy of mine, he was attending NIMI, which is New Mexico Military Institute. So it's a high school slash junior college. And so he was doing his military thing there. And so he gave me a call, and he's like, hey, man, I ain't got very much time to talk, but I just wanted to let you know that they're getting ready to move us out. I don't know what's going on. All I know is that we're being attacked, and I just wanted to let you know and just give you like one last goodbye in case something happens. And I was like, all right. So I'm like half asleep trying to like wake up, like, what is this phone call all about, man? And so I hung up, and my girlfriend was just like, "Who was that? What was that?" And I was like, "I don't know. He told me to turn on the TV." So I turned on the TV, and right when I turned on the TV, that's when the second plane crashed into the tower. So I actually got to see the second one. And I will say this, it was a very eerie day. And the reason why I say it was a very eerie day is because where I lived, we have Sandia National Labs, we have Kirtland Air Force Base, and we also have an air traffic control center. And so we have all these major things here in Albuquerque. And so when it was my turn to go to work, I was working at Olive Garden at the time. I just had to walk because it was like not even a block away. And it was for rush hour traffic. And I remember walking out there to Olive Garden, going over the interstate and not a car in sight. And walking to Olive Garden, not a car in sight. I got there and we had maybe like three customers, and they were just like, you know what, we're just gonna shut it down for the day. And yeah, it was a pretty crazy, eerie feeling to be walking around and in rush hour traffic and there being nobody out.
How long did you? I mean, I'm assuming you probably knew about the Marine Corps, but did you already know about the Marine Corps at that point, or how long between then and hey, I want to join the Marine Corps?
So at that time, just like you guys, didn't know what I was gonna do with my life. I had dropped out of school, and so that's a whole story in and of itself. But
We're gonna give you a whole. I can't. I'm looking forward. I'm gonna give you a whole hour at least to tell us your entire story, Brandon. Especially all the cool things. If not to steal your thunder here, but if you saw Brandon's resume, it's pretty sweet. I like some of the stuff on there. It's worth bragging about. I'm looking forward to giving your entire episode. But go ahead, Andrew, or go ahead, Brandon. How long between September 11th to you're like I want to be a Marine?
well, the thing is I was working and I was just, trying to make money to survive, still not knowing what I was going to do in life. And so what I ended up doing, uh, I think I went to like a family function or something like that, and my brother-in-law, he said to me, he's like, you know what, man, just join the military. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And so, as things were unfolding, in the world and stuff like that, I decided to give it a second thought. And so, let's see here, I think it was late 2001 is when I decided, you know what, I need to do something because we got recessions going on, we got the things going on with our country. So, you know what, I need something stable. So, because I need something stable, that's when I decided that I was going to go ahead and join one of the armed services, not necessarily the Marine Corps.
Oh,
Um,
come on now. How long did it take? How many? I can't not to interrupt. I too went to all the branches and was like, let me see what I can get. Let's see what they're offering. But at no
mhm.
point was like, I could join the Marine. I could join the Army. I know when I went into the Navy, I think I was in there for 15 seconds. Uh, but go ahead, keep going, Brandon.
It was kind of the same thing with me. So I was like, I first went to the Air Force. So I was thinking about doing something either in aviation or with something to deal with computers because I knew those were the wave of the future. And so, same thing. I went into the recruiting office and they could not tell me like anything about it. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not going to go into a service that can't tell me anything. And you're the recruiter. Like, you're supposed to be recruiting me for this job. And so I immediately left
Oh,
there.
everybody's recruiter lies. We know that.
And so I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to join the army. Sorry, army, but they just take anybody. So I didn't want to be like, I don't feel like special or anything like that. And then with the Navy, I was like, I don't want to be stuck on a ship doing something stupid on a ship. So I'm going to go into the Marine Corps. And I was like, okay, well, if I go into the Marine Corps, what do I want to do? What do I want to be? And that's when I decided, you know what, my family has a long line of military history. Not only do they have a long line of military history, but they also have a long line of um, law enforcement. And so I was like, so none of them have ever combined the two. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to be the first person and I'm going to combine the two. And at least with the Marine Corps, I know that I'm going to be challenged. And so because of that, I wanted to challenge myself. And so that's why I went into the Marine Corps and went into law enforcement.
Awesome, awesome. And real quick too, Andrew, I know you had mentioned you were probably watching Sesame Street, but one thing that came up is, do you remember about how old you were the first time you were either aware of September 11th or was told a story about it?
So I was only 3, but I do remember somewhat of the day because my best friend and one of my next door's neighbor had a family member that worked in the Twin Towers. So we remember having, fathers were working, but mothers were home. And I remember he got dropped off at my house for a little bit, and his mother was very upset. So I do remember, and that's just kind of a vague memory, but as I got older, it was something that was, every year, September 11th was something in school that was always talked about. And growing up as a kid, I'm a, probably, I think 5 years older than your oldest kid, Chris.
Something like that. Yeah, well, he just
Um,
turned 21.
so just as he would have gone through, I grew up with a lot of kids whose fathers or mothers would come back and surprise them in school from deployments. So it was something that you would see pretty consistently. So it was we weren't removed from it.
So, real quick then, Andrew, when did you learn about the Marine Corps? When did you learn about the world's greatest fighting force and knew that that's what I need to do?
Well, I always loved history and I picked up on it and a lot, especially Chesty Puller and some of the big names.
Where are you? Where we love you, Chesty, no
We
matter
do love
where you
Chesty.
are.
Pull them in.
At the time, there was
Yes.
a few more notable or more media notable Medal of Honor recipients like Kyle Carpenter and Dakota Meyer. And those, I believe, Dakota Meyer was in high school at the time when he was awarded the Medal of Honor. Um, and then through high school, some of my close friends were very into the Marine Corps, and they were already not necessarily in the delayed entry program, but on their way to being it, doing workouts with the recruiters. One of those guys is now a captain at an infantry unit out in Camp Pendleton, and he is really the driving force for everybody, I believe. He's wanted to be a Marine since he was a young child, and he accomplished his dreams. And the other friend, unfortunately, was not able to join the Marine Corps. We found out he had cancer right before he was going to go to MEPS, and that kind of solidified my choice in enlisting in the Marine Corps because I was not completely sure, but then once I knew he wasn't able to do it, I was going to make sure one of us did.
And that brings up a good question. I really looking forward to hearing all kinds of stories in the future, Andrew. But um, something I did. We just had. Like I said, I'm not sure when everybody will see this podcast or when this podcast will air, but we just had Veterans Day, November 11th. I know I have several family members. In fact, I also know a military working dog handler that hopefully I'll get to bring on the podcast, whose birthday is actually on November 11th. But that's one thing that came up. I went to my son's elementary school yesterday. I think it was yesterday for Veterans Day, and I was there. I think we had 22 veterans within the community, probably all family members or parents of children at my children's school, and we were all talking stories. And one thing that came up was, why did you join the military? And I remember being in boot camp and our drill instructors going around to everyone individually and asking, why'd you join the Marine Corps? And I think I was like the second or third person they asked. And the guy who was next to me, the Marine recruit that was next to me, I believe his name was Tomervik, or maybe that wasn't what it is. It might be a different, and I'm sure we'll mess up names throughout this show, but hopefully I can make names correctly. But the Marine I was next to, like literally, his answer was, "I wanted to serve my country." And literally the drill instructor was like, "You see that? That's what a real Marine." And I was right after him. And he's like, "Why'd you join the Marine Corps?" And I was like, "I wanted to be a dog handler." And he's like, "What?" And I was like, "I wanted to serve my country." You know, as a recruiter would say, "This recruit wants to serve his country, sir." He's like, "That's what I thought," and moved on. I was like, "I wanted to be a dog handler." I was like, "I want to be a Marine too, but I really want to play with dogs." But cool beans. Well, that's a good intro for everybody. I want to jump right into, like I said, this would be a good transition. But let me go ahead and ask Brandon, what did you join the Marine Corps, Brandon? I know you, I kind of alleviated a little bit to you, but why did that calling to serve your country? Why does it really, why was it so impactful and changed the future for you?
Well, I guess I'd probably have to say, we were at war, everything that happened with September 11th and just wanting to, make an impact. And I think that's what, we're here and put on this earth for is to make an impact. And so I figured, you know what? I want to make an impact, and in doing so, let me just go ahead and do that. And didn't know how much I was going to make an impact as far as law enforcement goes, but I did know that law enforcement did deploy. So I knew I would still be able to make a deployment if it came down to it. Now, when I became a dog handler, and then we can talk about more about that on another podcast. Not everybody, like Andrew says, deploys when it comes to canine. So there's a whole story and everything behind that. Um, so I didn't think that I was going to get my opportunity to do it, but then it ended up happening. And so once that opportunity came, I definitely jumped on it. But at the time I was married, so I was just like, well, we're given the choice. At least I don't know about you, Chris, but we were given a choice because they were taking a number of slots. And so because they were taking a number of slots from each kennel, they wanted to take 3 slots from ours, and we had 12 personnel. And so my kennel master came up to me and he was just like, "Hey, I want you to go." And so I was like, "Well, let me think about it. Let me talk to the wife about it."
Yeah, no, and I'll do real quick, like that's so, and I've told this story before, but let me publicly, but let me throw it out here, and by all means, if anybody thinks that my story has changed, I'd be glad to hear you prove it. So, uh, I literally showed up for work, and I was dating a girl at the time, but I was at a small unit. I was stationed at headquarters Marine Corps. In fact, I was there for 4.5 years. I eventually became the kennel master there, and started a kennels there. When I got stationed there straight out of Okinawa, Japan, there were no dogs there, But we were in the middle of a war. I had spent the last year, give or take 11 months in Okinawa, working I had a narcotics dog. We only had, I believe, 4 bomb dogs on the entire base, or excuse me, 4 Marine bomb dogs on the entire base. But I had a drug dog. But when September 11th happened, the whole, the entire process or use of military police workmen and military working dogs completely changed. We started really ramping up because there was this I'd call it, I don't know if you would call it this, Brandon, but like this ominous threat, like something was going to happen in America again. But no, I showed up to Okinawa, or I went from Okinawa, Japan, and was stationed at headquarters Marine Corps. I was there for 4.5 years, and I was we had eventually gotten military working dogs. I think we had 3 dogs at the time. I had just gotten my dog in, I think, July of 2003. We got certified in August of 2003, but every dog, for the most part, a lot of dogs that were coming out of Lackland from 2001 to 2003 were single-purpose dogs. A lot of them were just explosive detection. So I had a single-purpose explosive detection dog, a 90-pound Dutch Shepherd that bounced on his back legs. He had I call him a kangaroo. But I showed up to work, and we had a small provost marshal's office, which were the military police works out of, and the kennels are theoretically attached to their command is either security battalion or is a provost marshal's office. And I showed up for work, 7:30, 07:30 for most Marines, especially when you're not working the shift. But I was a dog handler, and my provost marshal caught me before I even came in the door. And hey, do you want to go to Iraq? They're looking for dog handlers. They need every the order has came out, just like Brandon said, that they're looking for dog handlers. Uh, and he even told me, or I learned about this later, that nobody had ever deployed it out of headquarters of Marine Corps. The base was formed, I think, in the 50s, and it was, I think, 1954, if I remember correctly. But nobody had ever deployed out there. So, not really knowing that, but eventually told that. And all I said to my provost marshal was, can I think about it for about 5 minutes? Or, what turned into, hey, can I think about it for the length of a cigarette? And before I even went into shift, I smoked half of that cigarette, I believe, and walked straight into his office, without conversing with anyone, and said, "Yep, I definitely will go, sir. Sign me up." And he was good to go. I have the orders like within 90 days, or that was what he told me. This was, I believe, in give or take November of 2003. And correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon. I think we showed up to Iraq in 2000, would have been Mother's Day of 2004, if I remember correctly.
Well, we left North Carolina Mother's Day of 2004. Yeah.
Do you happen to remember, not really a sidebar here, but do you happen to remember, did we ever hang out? I know that I could tell several stories about when we were in Lejeune. In fact, for our audience, what's interesting, I got to Camp Lejeune I think about 3 weeks or so before we actually deployed, give or take. Was it February or so? Was that about right, Brandon? When did you get to
I don't know
Lejeune?
about you guys. So I was stationed at Cherry Point. So Cherry Point's about a half an
Hour.
hour drive
Yeah.
from Lejeune. And so because we were a half an hour drive from Lejeune, we would just check in.
Oh,
So the only thing that we did was we went to Lejeune. We got our orders 2 weeks prior to the quote unquote leave date. And so we went over there, we checked in, we got our quote unquote gear because I was an old school Marine. So because I was an old school Marine, I had the old school camis and everything like that.
chocolate
So the
chip,
only
right?
thing
Did you get the
uh
chocolate chip deserts?
yeah. So they gave me all that stuff, and because the other two Marines that were deploying with me, they were new school Marines, so they had already had their desert gear. So I actually wasn't really given any gear. I had to go out and I had to go buy my own gear.
Oh,
So I went there to Lejeune and I bought all my gear and everything like that. And then we went back to Cherry Point, and we basically stayed there. The only time that we ever went back to Lejeune was to do one real quick. This is how you do a roadside IED training. And we did it one time, and that was it. And then I never went back to Lejeune again um, because you guys came to us to Cherry Point in order to fly out.
oh, perfect. Yeah, and I was what's interesting about to create a little time for our audience that the final episode of Friends aired, I think, 2 or 3 days before we deployed, or maybe it was like the day of. In fact, myself and Morris Ernest and Jackson, I can't remember her first name. Her father was, I believe, a master sergeant stationed at Lejeune, and so we
Tiffany,
went and I
Tiffany
literally
Jackson.
we hung out in a master sergeant's living room and watched the final episode, or the season finale. Actually, it was a series finale of Friends to create a timeline for our audience. But I think I was down in and interesting, especially for our military viewers. I came this close. Like Brandon said, he deployed or was got orders out of Cherry Point. I was stationed at headquarters of the Marine Corps, and it was a non-deployable unit, so I had to get transferred from headquarters of the Marine Corps to Quantico, and then I went from Quantico to Lejeune. But what's interesting is, and I don't know if you remember this, Brandon, what unit or what unit? What weapon system did you have for that first deployment in 2004? Did you have M16, or did you have to use an M4, or did you get to
Good
use
old M16.
the old
Yeah, because
M16? Did you have the A1, A2 that didn't even have the rails on it? It was just the regular
Yep.
cover. Yeah. So I came this close to deploying with a MP5. I was qualified on MP5, which when you go through SRT school in the Marine Corps, which is actually in Fort Leonard, Missouri as well, you have to qual on an MP5, which is a 9 mil little submachine gun. And I promise you, I came this close to deploying with that because when I transferred, I had to transfer down to Quantico, and from Quantico got orders to Lejeune and deployed out of there. They took my MP5 and gave me different orders that didn't include my MP5. So if you remember this, Brandon, I was the only one on that deployment that only had a pistol. I only had an M9 9mm pistol. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that, but I will do a little sidebar real quick for the viewers, for those that have never done or anything canine related in the military. And I think this is very important, so that way people understand, is that we do have canine that does deploy overseas. So you have your field canine, and then you have your garrison canine. So Chris and I, we were garrison. So garrison, we are the people that we guard the base. So whenever there's a wartime situation, we don't deploy. We stay back in the United States and we take care of the bases in the United States. And then the field canine, you have first MEF and second MEF, so Marine Expeditionary Forces. And so typically, what they would do, or the way that it's supposed to be typically, is that one unit would deploy to a country, and then when they get done with their deployment, then second MEF, or well, let me rephrase that. So if first MEF were to deploy first, they would do their deployment, and then when they were done, then second MEF would come in and they would do an exchange and deployment with them, and they would just go back and forth and ping pong off of each other on deployments. The problem is that when the war was going on, we were at war with Afghanistan and Iraq. So first MAF was taking Iraq and second MAF was taking Afghanistan. So they were rotating internally with each other. So first MAF was rotating internally, second MAF was rotating internally. And with the new warfare that was going on with IEDs, improvised explosive devices, or VBIDs, vehicle improvised explosive devices, there were people that needed dogs. There were units that were like, hey, we need a dog, we need a dog. And they were just way too thin. So because they were way too thin, that's when they decided to start handing out orders to the different handlers at different bases. And that's how Chris and I ended up getting deployed as garrison and not having any field experience. Now, with that being said, real quick, I will say this. We had no training on
No.
what to do in a field environment with a canine. Like I don't know about you, Chris, but I did training with SRT, or Special Reactions Team, or SWAT as they call it in the civilian world. So I did have some training with SRT, but SRT and field, two totally different things, especially because we're looking for explosives in theaters and cars and stuff like
Warehouses.
that. And this is totally different. So we had to learn everything on the fly because there was nothing in place for us to learn. They do have a place now called YPG, Yuma Proving Grounds, and that's where canine handlers from all the different branches go to learn how to do deployments in a field type environment. But we didn't have that.
Oh yeah, and
So
you steal my thunder there a
yeah,
little bit. In fact, um, when trying to come back to Lejeune, I think when we were at the handlers reunion, I had made a joke to you. I think you had brought up that you really wanted to go skeet hunting, right? You had never shot a skeet before. Is that, remember that correctly? And I told you that you didn't get to do that while we were, because when the 2 or 3 weeks before we deployed, once I left um, headquarters Marine Corps and got down to Lejeune, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks. We were qualling. I didn't even have I didn't have anything beyond the M9 anyway. But we got selected, or you could volunteer, and I got to do skeet shooting for like the local community. So I had to get down in the pit and pull a little thing and load the birdies inside the little clay pigeons. I think that's what they're called, clay pigeons, birdies, whatever. and you shoot them out there, or you sling them out there, and then they would shoot them. But yeah, like Brandon said, there was one thing I want to highlight, and hopefully we're going to talk about this in the future, especially depending on who we can get on who we've got planned to come in on that. Who? Let me say that again. One thing that's going to be interesting going forward, and I want to highlight is, as military working dog handlers deploying for that first time, there was no what we call a standard operating procedure, an SOP for taking a, as Brandon said, a garrison military working dog into the field. We and even those first deployments, and I'm looking forward to talking about some of the stuff we did in 2004, and it's going into future episode or future podcasts, future deployments, all that stuff. That we literally were writing the script on how to utilize a military working dog, especially the way military working dogs were trained. To talk more specifically about the transition from garrison to the field, that we had to write the book on it. It wasn't until we started losing dog handlers, and really especially going into 2004 when the insurgents in Iraq were completely changing the way they were fighting us, if you will. That we had, like Brandon said, it wasn't until we developed the pre-deployment training course in Yuma Proving Grounds for military working dog teams deploying overseas that there was no standard operating procedure on how to find an ID or how to track an ID maker. So I'm looking forward to talking more in depth about that as well, Brandon.
Yeah, something to tie into Brandon is since I was at Cherry Point, just about 15 years later, is the second with my generation is all of your peers were our kennel masters now. So
Hmm.
everybody that was in at the same time as you is now in charge. So Cherry Point went back to non-deployable because we have the field battalion kennels or the MEF kennels. But then in the end of my career, they closed down the MEF kennels. So there was no more. And then once it came time for the Afghanistan withdrawal, they had to call on the PMOs. So sadly, I didn't have enough time left on my contract to be eligible for that, and one of my handlers ended up going. But by that point, they had already closed down Yuma Proving Grounds. But that wasn't such an issue as it was in your two's case, where you were just kind of doing a pre-deployment workup course on the Camp Lejeune. It was, we've had those lessons learned. We had all the information available, and we were able to implement that for training prior to that workup. There wasn't a real gap in knowledge there, like you guys had.
So let's talk about that very first day in Iraq, just to paint a picture for our audience. We landed, and now Staff Sergeant Ellington, and I hope he gets to come on the episode. Hopefully he'll pop in here at some point in time. But Staff Sergeant Ellington, if I remember correctly, gave us no orders other than we land with all of our gear, we pull our dogs out of our kennels, and we know that they're going to offload all of our stuff. But just like everybody has hopefully seen the movie Jarhead, but just like Swafford talks about in Jarhead, the back of that plane drops down and the heat hits you like a microwave. And I felt, and I'd love to hear your experience, Brandon, but I felt just like I had no idea what we were walking out to. So we walked out of that plane into an oven, not knowing if we were going to instantly get shot at. And of course, we get there on the flight line in Al Asad, Iraq, and there's airmen and Marines standing around, and they don't even have their blouses on. They're out in t-shirts, and I don't remember them laughing at them, but I think they probably knew that the dog handlers were showing up, and there was a nice sight to come out. But I remember walking out of that plane with my military working dogs, surrounded by all my other fellow Marines and their military working dogs. I felt like I was 10 feet tall, and I had the biggest balls in the world. And I was ready to kick indoors and stack bodies, drop panties, whatever you want to say. We'll make fun of my military veterans out there. But what do you think, Brandon? What was your first thought? Similar or different?
Mine was a little bit different. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but when we flew in, because luckily, we flew in on a big base. So because we flew in on a big base, it's still not as bad, but they still did it anyways, was a combat dive into a landing. So on a C5, you're actually facing in the opposite direction. So normally when you get into a regular airplane, everybody faces the same direction as the pilot does. But in a C5, the pilot is, facing the way that he should be, but we're all facing the opposite way. So when we did that combat dive, I was just like, we're like going forward, and it was a weird feeling doing that combat dive and just flying in and making that landing. And then, of course, once we get off, it wasn't the heat that I remember. What I remembered was how bright it was.
Oh yeah.
Going
Oh
from
yes.
a dark C5 out and walking into that bright, bright desert, white,
Yeah, you
basically
get
sand.
it's like snow. You get almost white out from the reflection on glass. One thing that'd be interesting to talk about. Do you remember? I called the dust there like talcum powder, but do you remember the first, probably the first couple of days we were there? Um, and I hopefully not stealing your thunder here, but the sandstorm that hit. Uh, I remember, like you said, we get out of the plane and the heat hits us. It's bright as crap. You kind of get used to everything, and we make it over we make it over, and they put us in these shack buildings that are nothing more than, nothing more than plywood for the most part, if I remember correctly. And then,
No, we were intense.
oh yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah, we say I think,
Yeah, because when that sandstorm came, it was in the middle of the night and it blew our tent like crazy. And one of the tent poles fell down and landed in between my rack and another Marine's rack.
oh
And
yeah, didn't
the
y'all
thing
have to?
almost caved in on us. We had to
Didn't you
hurry
brought?
up and put the pole back up. And then we took all the dog food and we put it
That's
around it. And then
right.
we taped
Yep.
it all up together to hold it in place.
Uh, and then do you and I think not to make the story a little more, but we are talking about 2003 in Iraq. We are in a war zone. Do you remember? I think we hadn't been there more than a few days, and a Marine, the first Marine that died after we had gotten into country. Do you happen to remember PFC Cutter?
Yeah, man. So I remember being inside the tent, and I think we were playing spades or something, and all of a sudden just heard all this commotion going on outside, and running out there, and he was there on the ground, and unfortunately he succumbed to, I guess we'll say like electrical shock. From my understanding, I guess he was trying to work on their AC unit or something like that, and he ended up getting electrocuted.
Yeah, so as I remember, I think myself, Ernest, I can't remember if it was Can or maybe it was Cannon. I can't remember who was walking out with us, and we were going outside to smoke. And before we even got out the door, I remember hearing a pop. But I think at first, maybe thinking it was a shot, not knowing what it was. I don't remember specifically if we had had incoming at any time up to that point because this was only like day two. But yeah, we were walking outside and heard that pop, and as soon as we opened the door, you can. I mean, this happened maybe 10 or 15 seconds before we walked outside, and you saw him flop, and two people jumped out, and there were. I was actually. Do you happen to remember that there was a dog handler that either I think it was before he joined the Marine Corps. He was at EMT, and do you happen to remember his name? If not,
Mm-mm.
it's okay. Uh, but him, myself, and I believe Ernest or Cannon was with us, and we were standing right next to him. And him being an MP and or an EMT, and he said, "No, man, in a situation like that, there's not much we can do for him." And from what I remember, I think they were talking about it, but there was a shovel laying there, and the AC unit was right there, and somebody there was murmur and conversations that he was either doing something or doing work or whatever he was doing on the AC unit with an e-tool. And unfortunately, I believe, like you said, he was electrocuted. And unfortunately, that was our first, or at least, did you actually see him, Brandon, or no?
Yeah, I saw him because, like I said, we heard the commotion going on, and so we stopped what we were doing and we ran out there. And there was by the time we ran out there, a lot of people were starting to circle around him and stuff. So,
Yeah.
but I remember seeing him on the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, we were standing right next to him. They were doing CPR on him, and not to. Well, either way, we can move on from that. So, what was really impactful at this point, going through that, really made it really clear to me where we were, and this was not even a combat related casualty. This was, purely a Marine that, you know, uh, unfortunately just failed for doing something shouldn't have been doing. But, that was at the moment that it was really clear where we were, and that this was we were in a situation that was potentially life and death. But I'd love to hear Brandon. Was how was the perspective of that for you?
Well, it didn't really hit me at that point. For me, the point in which reality kind of set in for me was the first time going outside the wire. So, um, I don't know how things were where you were, but over there at Al Assad, we had this one area where the convoy had to stop, and that's where we would load or unload, depending on if you were coming back on or if you're leaving base. And so that's where you would do your checks and all that kind of stuff before fully going outside the wire. So doing our rifle checks, our pistol checks, all that kind of stuff. The guys up in the turrets and things like that, doing their tests. That's when reality finally set in for me that it was just like, okay, this is it. This is go time. And that's when it really set in for me.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Staff Sergeant Ellington. I remember just the conversation of, hey, who really wants to get into the shit, if you will. I know Cannon and I were really excited about it, but we had no idea what we were going into. If I remember correctly, I think I was one of the only sergeants when we got there. I know there was a bunch of several of them that got promoted. I know Can got promoted while we were there. Cannon got promoted there. I believe Ernest got promoted when we got there. Glass, I believe, got promoted when we got there. Was it Alvarez, maybe? I know Jackson picked up corporal when she got there. I think everybody ended up getting promoted, but since I was one of the only sergeants and where we were going to get sent to, I got sent out to Korean Village, which was in the Al Anbar province. But I remember Ellington specifically saying, "Hey, you're going out by the Syrian and Jordanian border, and that's all where all the insurgents, the anti-coalition materials, all the bomb making, the IED making, the weapons, the personnel were all flooding in from those border checkpoints." But if I remember correctly, Brandon, you stayed at Al Assad for several months before I ran into you and you visited me out in Korean Village.
Yeah, so I was there for 5 months, but I deployed with several different units out of there. So one of the units, we would go outside the wire and we would do nothing but go to the different Iraqi police departments and we would do like training with them. And then like another group, I would go out and do missions with them, several different types of missions. We'll talk about that in my podcast, but um, yeah, so I was just with several different units there in Al Assad. So finally, when I got these orders to go to Husayba, that's when I finally ran into you for the second time during our deployment, and that's when I finally got to go to a smaller base, and it was still no different. I still saw, things hitting the fan, but it was definitely a little bit different.
Yeah, so let me do a quick little segue there too. I remember my first helicopter ride, and in fact, I'm going to do it just for this photo or just for this episode. Uh, I sh- I showed this picture at school, and I don't know how where I'm sure maybe our team gets mad at me for showing this, but here's a picture of me, and you can't really tell how young I am, but that's like
And lower.
19 and 20. That's like 20-year-old me on my first helicopter ride. In fact, this picture was taken by Can who was the first military working dog handler to die in combat since Vietnam. So Adam Can took this picture. If his father, Lee Can, is watching, I've shared this picture with you, I think. I hope you have it. But if you don't, I'd love to give you a copy of this. But Adam Can took that picture, and it's I've been carrying around forever, and I love that picture. But I got, because I was a sergeant, I was sent out to what it was called Korean Village, and there's a whole story about it. Supposedly it was built by, Korean contractors who built the road. I can't remember what road it was that goes all the way out to the borders of Syria and Jordan. So because I was a sergeant, I was an area of operation kennel master, which means I had 2 Marines under me and 2 Air Force dog handlers. The Marines under me were Sergeant Can and Sergeant Cannon. I hope we can get Cannon on the podcast. In fact, I've talked to Jason on Facebook before. I'd love to hopefully have him on the podcast. But we got out there, and eventually our 2 Air Force handlers came in, and originally myself and Can went to, or excuse me, Can and Cannon I sent out to Walid, which was the border with Syria, and then I worked out of Tribil, which was the border of Jordan. I think I worked with it was Fox Company 2-7. So what, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, Fox Company. I'd love to talk to some of those guys at some point, but I had a great time out there being a quote unquote pogue, a person's other than grunt. But when I got out there, I got in both myself and the other 2 Marines that I sent out to Walid at the at the Syrian border, and we got to live with the grunts out there for about 2 months. Eventually, my Air Force handlers showed up, and I got to pull back. I gave them Walid, and they took over the ECP at Tribil, and I went back to Korean Village. But my favorite story, my favorite time of when I was at Korean Village, and I'd love to, hopefully I get to bring somebody on, we could tell this story again, but we were just doing entry control points. So all the trucks that were coming in, they would supply, and they were on their way to wherever they were coming in. They were bringing everything from food. They were bringing in meats. They were bringing in gear. Who knows what all they were bringing in. But all I was doing was searching the ECP, a fair amount of the time. But I might be searched. One day I might search 20 trucks. The next day I might search 200 trucks. I might not search anything for several days. But while we were out there, we had shifts, and I usually worked with the morning, and if we didn't have much coming through the entry control point at night. But we were out there, and it was we had one computer, and you essentially sign up, and you could Skype your family, you can get on and access the internet, and a lot of things were like Yahoo Sports and AOL Messenger back in those days. But I'm sitting out there one night, and we heard a commotion. And what it was there was a PFC, and he had gotten in the Porta-John, and he'd either upset somebody or whatever it was, but they strapped this Porta-John closed, tipped it over, and he spilled out of that thing covered in turds and toilet paper and puking. It was God, it was so nasty, right? And so we had limited, it was a little bitty fob out there at the border, and we had a limited amount of water, including you could take 1 5-minute shower once a week. And Bird was in the, excuse me, I didn't even want to drop his name. But out of this base, we have a limited amount of water. So you get 1 5-minute shower once a week. And this PFC, obviously, he's really nasty, and he's in a bad place, and he's cursing up a storm, and he has to go back into the barracks to go through the entire barracks back to the shower room, and he's in the shower for what felt like an hour. And so I literally saw all this stuff unfold, and him getting knocked over in the Porta-John, him falling out of the Porta-John and cursing up a storm, going back into where everybody's sleeping. Everybody gets woken up. And I think I'm the only sergeant. There's a staff sergeant that's in charge of the platoon. They have a butterbark lieutenant who, funny enough, was a graduate of Harvard. But this staff sergeant comes out, and he's upset. He's cursing he's yelling, and he's calling all hands on deck, and everybody has to meet out at the pavilion. And he comes up to me, and he's like, "Hey, Beatty, did you hear what happened?" And he's a grizzled old staff sergeant, and I was like, "I saw it all, Staff Sergeant, what happened? So I tell him the story of this PFC, for whatever reason, this upset some of the Marines in the unit, and they got back at him, and he's in there washing washing himself up right now. And so he wakes up the entire platoon and gets him out there at the pavilion. And I don't know anything about what I'm supposed to do as a grunt. I've never been a sergeant under a staff sergeant like that. So, he's like, I gotta go talk to my Marines, right? And he starts walking towards the pavilion, and I put my cigarette out, and I'm like, okay, I guess we're going to see some grunt stuff now. And the moment we start walking, I think he hears me, and he stops, and he turns around. He goes, Baity, let me be a staff sergeant for a minute. I staff sergeant, and I walk back in the computer room, and I never know what happened, but we literally the very next day or within the next couple of days, we were out in the pit, and we were all had a big boxing match, a little camaraderie fight out there, and I got to fight one of the one corporal is in the unit, and I think he's probably 2 or 3 inches taller than me, but a little bit less skinnier than me, but since we were the only NCOs other than the staff NCO, and he didn't fight anybody, but our butter bar fought one of the other Marines, but I fought this corporal, and I put a licking on him. But that was one of my favorite stories for being a pogue and being attached to the grunts. But at some point in time, those Air Force handlers came out, and I sent. They replaced me, and I got to go back to Korean Village, and that's when I really got to do missions. Up until that point, I had only done entry control point, like you were talking about, Brandon, back at Al Assad. I hadn't really done any true combat missions yet. But when I got to go to Korean Village and really got to start kicking indoors, and that's when the fun stuff started. I'd love to hear, Brandon, about your first helicopter ride.
So my first helicopter ride, I actually was supposed to have one prior to this one. One of the groups that I was with, we were actually supposed to go out on a helicopter, and we were just going to be flying around. And when we spotted a potential threat, we were actually going to land the helicopter, and we were just all going to bust out and take over this vehicle. I really would have loved to have done that, but for some odd reason, that didn't fall through, unfortunately. So my first helicopter ride wasn't a cool one. It was just moving from Al Assad out to Husayba, but that's when we had to stop off, and we actually had to fly in to where you were based at. And so that was when I got to see you for the second time on deployment, because once we touched down over there in the Chinook, then we stayed, I think, overnight with you guys, and then we had to catch a convoy out to the fob that we were supposed to be going to at that time. But it was really cool to be able to, see the countryside and things like that, and getting that experience of finally getting. And I did do quite a few missions outside of the wire, but it was kind of like the same thing over and over, the same scenarios, the same sceneries, all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of nice to be able to get up there in the Chinook and be able to experience something a little bit different. But nothing cool or exciting ever happened in that. We were just moving from place to place.
And you said you were at Salasad for what, the first 5 months of the deployment?
Yeah, so I was there for the first 5 months, and I was with, I think I want to say 6 different units at that. No, I'm sorry, 5 different units at that time, because I was with 2 different units while I was over in Husayba as well.
Oh yeah, we'll have to give you a whole episode. You can lay out everything. I'd love for you to at least potentially talk some crap about some grunts and see if we can get some attention. So, definitely comments below if you ran into Brandon out there. Same thing for me. But let's do a good jump here. I love, one thing that I was excited about when I got to pull back to Korean Village away from the borders was going on those. One thing that I was excited about when I got to get pulled. The one thing that I was excited about when I got pulled back from the borders and got to work at Korean Village was actually getting to go do missions again. And I'm sure you and I could talk about it for days on, those first couple of missions. But I'd love to, I'm interested to know when I got to Korean Village, my biggest challenge was getting my dog prepared. Like you had mentioned earlier, Combat ready was not a thing back at that point in time. You know, we linked up with explosive ordnance disposal, or as we call it, EOD. And was able to actually get our hands on some explosives, some ammunition, some gunpowder, and things like that were truly being used out there. But how hard was it for you, Brandon, when you actually got to your first base, and there probably wasn't a dog handler there? How hard was it you to get ready to start kicking indoors and going on missions with the grunts?
Well, when I got to my, I guess we'll say, first unit, because like I said, I was still stuck there on Al Assad. I was with three other Marines. So I was with Glass and Vasquez and Broadhurst, I think is the other guy's name. And so we were all together with uh, the 17 MP battalion or something like that. And so, like I said, with that one, we really didn't go out on missions. Our mission, because they were MPs, assigned to them, what we would do is we would go outside the wire to the different Iraqi police departments that were in the area, and they would do kind of like what's the term called? Kind of like retraining. So whatever training that so what ended up happening is that the Iraqi police departments that were in the area, they would get trained on Al-Assad. And then once they got trained on Al-Assad, then what they would do is they'd go out to their police departments, and then they would get, stationed at whatever police department. So we would go out there and we would do retraining with them. So like handcuffing techniques or, certain different things. And that was our mission. So what I would end up doing is, as a dog handler, is going out there and doing like route clearances. When we would get to the compounds, we would search the compounds for explosives and things like that. So it really wasn't anything fancy per se, but we would still, because the place that we would go to, if I can remember correctly, um, it was Kuseba. And that was like the place where everything was happening. And we would always have to go through there to get to other compounds. And so we were always getting shot at and things like that over there. We'd have to do investigations out there, things like that. So that was basically what I ran into on my first missions, or was just basically going out there and doing route clearances and stuff like that.
Well, and I think that's perfect. I think one thing that we have missed talking about so far during this podcast is, that elephant in the room, us and our dogs. My dog was about a 90-pound Dutch Shepherd named Marco. In fact, all military working dogs have alongside. They have a tattoo in their left ear, and my dog's Marco was Foxtrot 285. So he had an F285 tattoo in his ear. But what was interesting about actually getting to Korean Village and doing actual missions with my military working dog was how it affects the unit. Those, and especially that first deployment, and for me being able to compare it to future deployments, how interested and how excited it is the Marines and those grunts like having a dog. There's a What's interesting about having a military working dog in a combat situation is, especially in an Arabic nation, that they're very, very scared of dogs. So when you've got a giant black dog that's big and bouncy and making lots of noise and is intimidating, it tends to really part the seas. And what's really fun about that is, what our dogs are trained to do, which in my case, my dog was, for the most part, we did eventually get him to pass the protection portion of his patrol certification, the protection portion, but he had a really good nose on him. He was visually intimidating, I guess is the best way to say it. But one thing I want to talk about is, the whole point of us having that military working dog is providing a certain service to the unit we are. We're supporting their mission. Whether it's like I've joked around about kicking in doors, but what we're really doing is keeping them safe. And the vast majority of my job, especially that first deployment, was finding the things they were using against us, finding the explosives, finding their ammunition. They would hide things in what we would call caches or a cache. What they would do is they would dig a hole and either reinforce the sides, and they would hide all their things, and they would cover it where you couldn't find it. And they would hide their what we call anti-coalition materials. But what we were really looking for, and what we were really doing out there with our military working dogs, was clearing routes, making sure that we can that when they entered a building, that the building wasn't instantly going to blow up on them. There was a lot of concern, especially in 2004, about booby traps and them either booby trapping the road, booby trapping a door, booby trapping a gate, booby trapping a dead animal on the side of the road or a refrigerator. And in fact, my very first combat find, which was with Adam Can, we got out on. This was probably the second mission that we ever did inside Arupa, which is the city we worked with. We get out of the Humvees, get out of our vehicles, and we're going to search the area. And I go one direction, and Cam goes the other. And as we're searching, we're heightened up, and we really don't expect to find anything. But of course, we're motivated, and it takes I think more than 5 or 10 minutes before I see a change in behavior with my military working dog. And for non-dog trainers out there, that change of behavior really to us is a cue that our dog is found something, or is smelling something, or is interested in something that he's been trained to find. So when that change of behavior hits in Marco, and he starts to drag, and we start to fly around the building, and as soon as I get around the building, at this point I am pretty sure, okay, he is definitely following an odor. And as soon as I get around the building, guess who comes out the other side and being dragged by Bruno is Adam Can. And then we're both coming to the same pile of boxes that are right behind this warehouse. And our dogs both run straight up to these boxes, and they respond, which means they sit next to these boxes and they stare at them because they know they have found something and it's time for them to get their toy. And I love telling that story. In fact, I told that story, at a memorial for military working dogs who had passed a couple of years ago. And I got to tell that story probably for the first time in front of these military working dog handlers, talking about Adam Can, and it was really excited for me to tell that story. But please, before I get too winded and get emotional, Brandon, how was when you got down and did those first missions? I know we had found a kit, and we were prepared to go out there and actually find the things they were using against us. But how long before you got your first find and you knew you were doing a good job supporting your fellow Marines?
Yeah, so my first find was when I was in Huseba. And so we went out on this mission, and this particular mission, we had gotten some intel about some unsavory characters, we'll say, but they were in different locations. So because they were in different locations, we had three different buildings that we were going to hit, and we were going to do them all simultaneously. So each dog handler was assigned to a different platoon, and that platoon would hit a specific house. So we had it all set up and everything like that to where it was a SIMO hit. And so when we went in to our compound and our facility and started searching, I went into this one back room. And in this back room, my dog was showing a change of behavior at the bottom of this dresser. Now, this dresser was up against a wall, and it had mattresses, the sleeping mattresses that they use. It
Oh,
was lined
yes.
up all the way from the, excuse me, it was lined up all the way from the dresser all the way to the top of the ceiling, and then there were some that were off to the side. And so my dog was showing a change of behavior towards the bottom, so I was like, well, let's see if it's dropping from the top. So move all the mattresses. So I had somebody come in, they moved all the mattresses. Brought my dog back in, he's still smelling. Okay, so it's something with the dresser. So pull everything out of the dressers. So they pull everything out of the dressers, can't find anything, send my dog back. He's still going towards the bottom again. So I was like, it's either got to be underneath it or it's got to be behind it, one or the other. So that's when they pulled it away. And when they pulled it away, that's when they found a 9mm pistol with one fully loaded magazine.
Ooh, which
So
having a
I
pistol
thought,
over there was.
what's that?
If you found a quote unquote bad guy in Iraq with a pistol, he was probably somebody in charge or had stolen that thing or somehow he got you. You remember what make it was by chance?
I don't remember the make, but to like what you were saying, like unlike here in the United States, people have pistols and not a lot of people have rifles. It's kind of like the opposite. So from what we were told while we were deployed is that if somebody had a pistol, they were probably an unsavory character because hardly anybody ever had pistols out there. And getting this find and everything like that, I took it over and I gave it to our interpreter. But the interesting part was my find. So I also had a find in that same exact building. So what ended up happening is that, he confronts the guy about it. Guy doesn't really say anything too much. So now that me and my dog are done and we're not really doing anything, I was like, well, I'm going to start searching things within their house. And so I went into their bedroom, and in this bedroom, there was this bag, and it had something inside of it. And it felt like one of those jewelry boxes. That's what it felt like. So I opened up the bag, and I open it up, and sure enough, it's a jewelry box. And when I open up the jewelry box, I find this little teeny tiny address book. And so I'm flipping through it, and as I'm flipping through it, there's this one particular page that has something written on it. And so I was just like, I took it to the interpreter and I was like, I don't know if this means anything or if this is anything, but here you go. He looks at it, and you should have seen his eyes. And he turns around and he takes that little book and he starts yelling at that dude. And he's just like, da 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 da, da," and he's over there pointing. And the guy's just like, eh. And so, long story short, whatever was in that book, we now had a fourth target. So now we had to gather together, my platoon, and we ended up going out and we hit a fourth objective. So not only did Bonte have a find, I also had a find.
Good deal. That's all. And what I'd like to talk about too is there's a lot of things we were doing in 2004 that we were writing the book. We were writing that quote unquote standard operating procedures on how to quote unquote find the stuff they're using against us, how to keep them from hurting it with us, and what I'd like to talk about, is finding the bad guys that were hiding the IEDs. There was later on in the war, there was a big desire or need to find these high value targets, the ones that were quote unquote masterminding, or like Brandon was saying, that fourth target who might be someone, especially when you find someone with a pistol. Hey, they may be doing, like Brandon said, some unsavory things, but we're working up the echelon and trying to find those, the masterminds, the people who are managing, buying, doing supply and logistics, and who are quote unquote the leadership of the insurgents. So one thing that was interesting that I think will make a good segue is, did you ever get a chance to actually be just a military police officer while you were deployed, Brandon?
Yeah, so while I was with my first unit, so like I said, I was deployed with four people. And so Glass and Vasquez, they would team up together to go out on missions. And then myself and Broadhurst would team up to go out on missions together. And so they didn't need two dogs, and especially because we didn't have air conditioning back at that time. So what we had one vehicle, but so we did have a civilian group that would go out with us. So they had one up armored SUV, and that's what we would put the dog in and the handler. So the second handler was kind of like the spotter. So I wouldn't take my dog. So if Broadhurst took his dog, He would be in the up armored SUV, and then I would be in the back with the Humvees and stuff like that, and I would be his spotter, and then we'd just flip flop on missions, and so that's what we would do. So sometimes the guys in the turret didn't want to be in the turret, so they would just be like, "Hey man, you want to man the guns?" And I was just like, "Heck yeah!"
Yeah, any opportunity to do something a little different. So,
Mhm.
what was one of my favorite things? I wouldn't say favorite, but it's one of the things I feel commendable about when I was on those missions, and this was actually with Cannon, I believe. And if I don't think Cannon was there, he might have been gone back to. In fact, I think Bruno had gotten sick, but Cannon and I were on this mission, and we found an IED maker. And then, as military police officers, which I love the fact that our the command we worked with, the Marines, in fact, that captain, was like, "Hey, you guys are military police officers, and you're supposed to do enemy prisoner of war or EPW transfers." So we had the opportunity, as a military police officer, to actually escort IED makers back to Al Assad, turn them over to human, and then they go. So from the end, and this was I think my second or third find where I found an ID or found one that was in the process of being made, and then we were able to track back. And well, I didn't have anything to do with the intel portion of it. We were able to track back to basically a family or a couple of different families, and then we got to go out there on a mission, kick in the door, search the whole house, and I found they had there's not really basements in Iraq, but they end underneath their kitchen. Uh, because my dog, she was going crazy, or excuse me, he was going crazy inside the kitchen. But we couldn't find anything, And in the end, we moved a rug, and were able to pull up from the floor, and it wasn't more than maybe a 5 by 5 foot pit underneath their kitchen, but they had shelves underneath there, and we found a piece of red tape that we had found on one of the IEDs that had literally just, I don't think it had killed that Marine, but we'd just got attacked by IED maybe a couple days or a couple weeks before that. And it was interesting with Can to find the IED, find the IED maker, and then be able to actually be a military police officer and transport them and turn them over to our authorities. Did you ever get an opportunity to do something like that, Brandon?
No, never had an opportunity to do that, but like I said, with that first unit that I was with, we would have to go out and conduct investigations because they were military police officers and they were dealing with the Iraqi police departments. So yeah, it was kind of actually funny now that you mention it, and I remember. So I'll probably save it for our
Yeah,
podcast.
save it for
It's
save
kind
it
of a
future.
long story.
I think our
Um,
viewers might be getting sick. We're starting to draw at this deployment, and in the end, let me finish this drink. In the end, this deployment lasted, I think, exactly 200 days. Um, and I think we'll get a lot of opportunities to talk about a lot of things from this deployment. But I really want to start talking about that trip home. For me, 200 days deployed. Being in the desert, being away from family. I remember how excited I was to go back to Al Assad when they told us, "Hey, they have a Taco Bell there." And I was so excited to get a Mexican pizza. You know, sponsor us Taco Bell, and I'd love a Mexican pizza for lunch. The next episode, I want to eat a Mexican pizza. But I remember getting back to Al Assad, and they only had hard and soft tacos, and I was like, man. Of course, I ate my hard and soft tacos, but one thing I remember, Brandon, when we got back to Al Assad, it had been hot all year round. It was, I think, at some point in times, 120, 130, 140 degrees. It was blistering. But the week or two right before we got to leave, this was November, almost thanks. It was middle to almost the end of Thanksgiving or the end of November, and the weather changed, and it got rainy and cold. Do you remember
mhm.
that, Brandon?
Oh yeah, I definitely remember that, and the biggest part that I remember about that is, we didn't know when we were gonna fly out. They had the C5 coming in, and something happened to it, and so all of our stuff was packed up. on a pallet, ready to fly out, except for us. So, luckily, and at this time they did have those makeshift barracks where, the engineers came in and they made these barracks. And so I remember I was like, you know what? I want my dog to be comfortable on this flight, and I had bought a Scooby-Doo blanket over at the bazaar.
I
And
do remember that.
so
Yes.
yeah, and so I took that blanket and I put it in his kennel with him, so that way he would have something nice and comfortable for the flight back home.
We
And I
try to take care
remember,
of our dogs, don't we, boy? Keep going. I love this story.
and so yeah, like you said, it was so cold that one night. Oh man, I was just like, sorry, Monty, I'm taking that blanket because I ain't
Yeah,
got nothing to sleep in.
and our
And
audience, they might know this, but a dog's average temperature is like 101 degrees, so they're naturally hot. Well, there's no way you're keeping up. And if you remember, Brandon, I think one person had this little electric heater, and we were all huddled, foot to head to foot to head to foot around this. And Brandon was the only one out of us that had a blanket. It was nice and warm, tucked over in the corner. We're shivering and freezing our butts off. But they had, if you remember, like you said, we didn't know when we were leaving, but we had packed up all of our stuff and palletized it and could not access it. It was wrapped up and everything, and we froze to death in that cardboard shed they put us in for 3 or 4 days. I remember, if you remember, we kept not sneaking out, but we would leave to the other side once we found out, hey, the flight's not today, because that was typically how it would work. You'd go up there and check the flight lines and talk to the flight crew, and they'd be like, no, not today. Your bird's still not here. Your bird's not ready, or whatever it is. And we kept going back and hanging out with the Marines that had just came in because they had heating because it was so cold. Oh,
yeah,
That's why the Whoopee has
because I
its
had my
name.
blanket, I stayed over there and I just wrapped up in my blanket.
yeah.
I
Oh
remember
man. Oh
you
man.
guys, being all huddled up and everything, and I was just over there by myself, just laying nice and straight on my cot and with my Scooby-Doo blanket.
Yeah.
You
And
learned why a Whoopee is a Whoopee the hard way. You
oh
will
yeah,
be
for
cold
sure, for
without it.
sure. And I remember, so me, Cannon, Morris, you, Jackson, I mean, the list goes on. Broadhurst, Alvarez, Glass. Who are some of the other names? In fact, and I hate to steal some thunder for you, I believe you have a signed flag, Iraqi flag, that we all signed on that trip, right?
Yeah, so I decided one day, you know what, I'm gonna buy an Iraqi flag and I'm gonna have us all sign it, when we get back together. And that's what I did. So I went through and had everybody sign it from that deployment.
That is awesome. I hope we get to see it one day. I'd love to see that again and get a flashback into the past. But I remember when we were getting ready to leave, and if you remember this, this will bring it a little more personally to me, especially for our viewers who may know me personally. That my oldest daughter was about to be born, and we weren't allowed to talk to our families back home for, I believe, a week or a week and a half. And operational security is you're not allowed to talk to your family back home and let them know when you're flying, where you're going, or any kind of big operational movements, just in case the enemy hears that and potentially use it against us. So we were pretty much dark from our family, and I knew my daughter was going to be born in like the next week or two, and it was mapped out perfectly where I would get back right before she was born. But do you remember that flight home, Brandon? And we landed in, I believe, Seville, Spain.
Hmm.
And when we first landed, we were, I think, a short 6 hour turnover. In fact, we weren't even allowed to go drink. We had to go. I don't think we were really allowed to leave the flight line. And we took off from on that flight. And do you remember what happened, Brandon?
Well, what I remember is I kind of stayed back and I just kind of like hung out and everything. But I do remember some people getting drunk and
Yeah, we
people's
so
faces getting drawn on.
yeah, we So yeah, that's the only downside when you put a bunch of Marines together, especially after everybody's been sober and no access, not even access to alcohol, no access to liberty, if you will. We couldn't get crazy and really brought off some steam. But when we took off from Seville, we had a little engine malfunction and we had to turn around and go back, and it delayed our flight, I think, about 18 hours or so. And so we went back out and we had to race to the gas station, if you will, and buy alcohol. And we all got pretty drunk. I don't remember if you got into the festivities, Brandon, but we
No,
had
I
a good
didn't.
time.
I was a good Marine.
Yeah, I'm sure you were. I definitely was not. In fact, well, we'll just leave it there. We'll leave it there for the audience's imagination. But unfortunately, with that little bit of delay, we landed on Thanksgiving. We landed back in the United States on Thanksgiving Day. In fact, we had to do a hop, if I remember correctly. Didn't we land in like Cherry Point and had to fly to Lejeune? Or do you remember, Brandon?
I don't know how it was for you guys, but yeah, we landed in Cherry Point, and so because I was stationed in Cherry Point,
You guys didn't get off the
that's
plane.
where I got dropped off.
Yeah.
So we had our K9 unit that was on duty that day because it was a holiday, and so he came over and he brought the van over for us, so that way we could load up our stuff and get our stuff over to the kennels. And our dogs and everything like that. But yeah, I don't know what happened after that. I don't know if you guys flew out or drove back to Lejeune or something. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
no, we just like you said, I think we stayed there for an hour or two, and then we hopped right back on the same plane, and we flew over and landed, I believe, in Lejeune.
Probably New River.
It might have been New
Yeah.
River, but we landed, and Christopher Mann. I hope I ever get to see him again too, or come to the reunion, man. Comment below. But Christopher Mann picked me up, and the very first thing he said was, "Congratulations, you got a daughter." And I was like, "Oh man," because I hadn't talked to the family yet. So, but needless to say, I got to got in the van. We had a truck. We got in the military working dog truck. The MPs picked me up and we drove back, and I got to hold my daughter, who was about 36 hours old, I think at the time, give or take. But what I found out, is if our plane hadn't have had a malfunction and we had landed on time, I would have probably just made the berth. But unfortunately, I was a little late. To my oldest daughter, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I missed it, but I mean, I'm here now. I made it. But I think as we're wrapping up, I'd like to ask, Brandon, what did it feel like when you got back? What was that first memory getting back to the United States?
My first memory was, um, I guess we'll say, the greeting, right? So, like I said, we get there, and we're getting off, and one of the Marines from the K9 unit, he came up and he had access to be able to catch us on the flight line. And so he caught us on the flight line and he was like, "Hey, Brandon, before you go see your wife, because she's right over there, just want to let you know that she cheated on you while you were overseas." And
Oh
so
no, Jody got to her. Oh,
Jody got to her. And
oh
so,
man, oh man, it happens. And
so I was just like, what are we gonna do?
for
How are
and
we gonna
I'll have to
process
interject
this?
for our audience out there. I know our military veterans kind of get it, but when Jody got to you, that means like somebody got to your wife while you were gone. Somebody was taking care of your duties for you while you were on deployment, and it is a joke for the military guys. I think I won't. I don't think it ever happened to me that I know. My wife and I have known each other for a long time, but yeah, I should have said that. Go ahead and cut that out. But anyway, well, you can keep it in, and the audience can have a laugh at me, and my wife can get pissed off at me later. But unfortunately, well, not unfortunately. God dang, I'm killing myself here. Fortunately, I never had to run into that. But I'm sorry, Brandon. I know that's a kick in the balls after going
Well,
over
it was
there and
kind of
doing what we did
bittersweet
and what we did,
because,
and then
well, what ended up happening is that while we were there in Al Assad, I got things together to purchase a brand new truck. And so she had,
oh yeah, we all do it. We always buy that truck when we first get back. I know everybody does.
So she actually, took my car and traded it in because I had already talked to the dealership. I already had the deal going. Everything was all done, through the internet. And so she goes and she trades it in, and she was nice enough to get the spray-in bed liner for me before I arrived there. And so she ends up picking me up in the truck. So it was kind of bittersweet because it was just like, well, this happened, but I'm getting picked up and I get to drive my brand new
See,
truck right
well,
away.
wait, wait,
So.
wait. And we might have to save this for a future episode, but did she, because it sounds to me like she hasn't admitted it yet. You found out secondhand.
Yeah, so I
And
found out secondhand, and I took 2 weeks to think about, is this something that I can forgive? And so I didn't tell her that I knew about it or anything like that, especially because, like you said, it was Thanksgiving Day. So I didn't want to ruin it for everybody, you know? So because I didn't want to ruin it for everybody, we were all going to somebody's house for Thanksgiving. All three of us had just gotten back from deployment. I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to keep this to myself. And it took me 2 weeks to finally come to a decision on what I wanted to do, and that's when uh, I had confronted her about it.
well, if I doubt it'll do much good now, but I think you're probably in a better place now. It's definitely a learning experience. But I hate to say, maybe I got a daughter and you lost a wife because of it. I don't know.
Yeah,
I hate that was a trade off.
I got a
So
truck.
yeah, you got a truck out. Hey, with a nice liner in the back though. There's your perks too. Well, awesome. Well, let me check my double notes here, and hopefully the audience doesn't get mad at us. But yeah, I think that probably brings us to the end of this podcast. And man, I think it was a good intro. I think that was great for everybody. I think it was a good introduction, and that 2004 deployment was definitely a. It was definitely it was a good learning experience for me. I'm really looking forward to telling a whole bunch of stories from our past. Looking forward to having Brandon, and Andrew on, and over the next year or so, I think we're going to try to put out episodes as often as possible. But if you're out there, like, share, comment, type below. Hey, if anybody ran this to us during deployment, if I want to talk some shit, and you get that out. Maybe I'll get a curse counter going up here somewhere, and I can donate money to something, to a cause, and like at the end of the year, but like I gotta donate $300 for all the f bombs I dropped this year. But in the end, comment and everything below. I'm looking forward to this journey together. In fact, I want to, before we leave today, I think to take a perfect opportunity, obviously, I want to thank Brandon for coming on today for our inaugural episode. I want to thank Andrew for coming along with this story and be our little interjector. I'm sure Andrew's going to be our version of what's his name? Fill me in, Andrew.
Jamie.
Jamie. Andrew's going to be our Jamie. It's somebody. He'll be our fact checker. I'm looking forward to talking some cha-ching, some shit up here, and bringing some minds together. We do have a fair amount of interviews planned. Brandon and I are going to be doing a trip to California here soon, and I'm hoping we can get 4 or 5 episodes out, or at least 4 or 5 interviews done, and really staying forward. I'm hoping in the future we're not sitting here talking for 2 and 3 hours. I hope our editing crew and production team don't get so pissed off at us. Cha-ching. For all the extra time and edits and cuts that we'll put. But I'm really looking forward to this journey. Brandon, Andrew, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to a future podcast. But before we leave today, Brandon, you've got a whole bunch of side projects you talked a little bit earlier about, but I'd love to send people over to your podcast, Trekking Through Time. Can you give us a little information and hope fill the audience in for us?
Yeah, so last year I started a podcast, or sorry, not a podcast. Let me now
Sorry.
now I gotta start back.
You're learning.
It's my first time today. Um, so yeah, I'll wait until you. There you go. For editing purposes. Yeah, so last year, what I ended up doing is I started up a YouTube channel. And so this YouTube channel, Trekking Through Time, what I do is I travel
Slow
to.
down, Brandon. Hey, Brandon. Start again. Slow. You're speeding up. Slow down.
Slow down. All right.
You were like trekking through time. You're like the disclaimer at the end of medication. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, may cause anal seepage.
Yes. Okay. That might be a little cut there. That would be
Cha-ching.
funny. Yeah. Ching. Exactly.
Yeah, so last year, what I ended up doing is I started up a YouTube channel, the YouTube channel Trekking Through Time. And so over at Trekking Through Time, what I do is I travel to long lost historical places and I bring people along the journey to see what it is that we find, what we locate. You know, sometimes it's artifacts, sometimes it's ruins, geoglyphs, petroglyphs, uh, pictographs, all different types of things. So yeah, so when it comes to that channel, that's basically what it is, and trying to grow that channel for all that stuff.
Perfect. Well, I'm excited, and I think we're gonna have an interesting journey. But everybody, please check out Trekking Through Time podcast. Go give him a look or give him a check out. Subscribe, like. I've watched most of his videos. They are fun, and I think over the next year or so, Brandon and I are going to be doing a lot of traveling. I'll probably drag Andrew along just because Jamie might as well keep him into. But we're going to be doing a lot of traveling, and I hope Brandon and I get to jump over on your podcast. I know you and I are going to be doing some traveling here soon to do some interviews and do some footage. Um, can you maybe give us a little hint? What can we expect from your YouTube channel over the next couple of episodes, or maybe the next couple of weeks or so?
Yeah, so when we go on this trip in December, I am going to a couple of different sites that I have been to before, and these sites are absolutely amazing. And so I can't wait to go back out there and actually film them. Last time I just did it just because I wanted to, and I just wanted to check it out. Now that I know the exact location and what's there and everything, I'm really looking forward to being able to go and reshoot these for my audience because, yet again, people don't know that these places exist, and the finds that are out there are absolutely amazing.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. And you probably have another episode coming out soon, don't you?
Unfortunately, no, because when we went over to the reunion, I ended up running into a couple of different snags, I guess we'll say, in travels. And so I went to a couple of different sites, but I was just having a really hard time getting to them. And so unfortunately, I don't have any new content right now. So that'll be the new content coming up here that I'll be recording in a couple of weeks.
Awesome, Brandon. I'm really looking forward to watching more of your episodes. Thank you, everybody, for watching today. Please like, share, and subscribe below. Comment if you've ever ran into any of us, or if you'd like to be on our show. Specifically, if you've been a military working dog handler, or if you think you have a story that links up to what we've done, please check us out on other platforms. We're going to be going live on Rumble. We'll be on Facebook. One last thank you to my co-hosts today, Brandon and Andrew. Thank you for coming on. I'm really looking forward to sharing more stories and sharing our legacy, sharing the military working dog community, share what veterans do post military service. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in today. Please like, share, and subscribe below.